James Schweikert took his daughter to school every day, but something started to seem very wrong when school administrators looked a little closer at the pair. The girls' elementary school called the police, who tracked the father down to his SUV and were taken aback by what they found inside. The 41-year-old dad had recently left Oklahoma with his 10-year-old daughter and turned up in Lakewood, Colorado, but their situation wasn't your average relocation. James Schweikard said he had to flee his home state because it was a bigger risk to stay there than to start anew in the Denver metro area. However, it didn't take long for him to run into the police, who were about to change the course of his day when they looked closer at his vehicle. The two had been living in Colorado for a few months, and James enrolled his daughter in school. After several weeks of going to and from campus, administrators noticed she was arriving at classes late and appeared very tired. One day, after walking his daughter into school, James returned to his parked SUV and found it surrounded by Lakewood police officers. "I saw them looking at my truck," I said. "Officers, what is going on?" James recalled. The officers were only there to help, but it was an odd occurrence to James, who is not used to getting help from cops. James and his little girl had been living in his SUV, which was jam-packed with their belongings, after leaving Oklahoma in search of a better life. "I packed everything up that we own in the truck there and we just drove here," he said. "It was more of a risk staying in Oklahoma. I couldn't get a job for anything, couldn't get a place to live. The homeless family was just trying to survive, but just when things were starting to look up, James's truck broke down. Unfortunately, not having reliable transportation also cost him his job. He had been driving his daughter to school before it broke down, and it became obvious to campus personnel that the vehicle was more than a means of transportation, it was also their home. They alerted local authorities out of concern for the young student. Lakewood police officer James Butler was on the scene, investigating the school's call when he started talking to James and learned about the heart-wrenching ordeal that he and his daughter had endured. Butler didn't just listen, he decided to act, and he did so with an urgency out of compassion for this man and his child. Butler immediately got the family into a shelter. He also arranged for Ace Towing to transport their car to Sun Valley Automotive, and both companies generously donated their services. "It was the right thing to do," Butler said. "Because at any point in time in our lives, any one of us can be in that same situation. Offering assistance to another human being is the right thing to do." After hearing about James Schweikard's story, people in the Lakewood community offered to help, and a handful of businesses offered a job to James, who has struggled with homelessness for a long time. As a result, James and his daughter were able to move into their first apartment in almost 2 years. "I'm in shock, I think," he said. "This has actually restored my faith in humanity." People donated cash, dishes, furniture, and clothes for James and his daughter. Sergeant Dave Hoover saved donated items in his garage for a couple of weeks, waiting for James to get his housing application approved. "It's all about being a part of the community," he said. "I'm amazed we've been able to do this so quickly. I've always been taught that you always give a hand up and not a handout." James has done a lot of the work getting himself together. James Schweikert is touched that anyone, especially a cop, would go to these lengths for the least of those in their community. "I'm very excited," James said. "I think it's awesome, I think it's really cool, very unexpected, but very cool," the appreciative father added. "We all have the ability to help others in need, and we may be the one who could use that compassion at some point in life." An entire community stepped up for a family that had been knocked down. We can all do something, big or small. All acts of kindness make an immeasurable difference in people's lives. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. Antiques Roadshow is a show full of surprises, but one particular episode crossed the line in terms of shock value. The piece in question didn't appear controversial at first glance, but when the hosts probed the seller about its history, more than a few red flags were raised. With a fishy backstory and ties to a famous creator, the item left the Antiques Roadshow producers at a difficult crossroads. With over 800 episodes and counting, Antiques Roadshow has invited hundreds of normal people to bring in junk from their homes to be appraised and sold. Normally the process goes smoothly, but then a certain contestant came along that pushed the well-meaning show to the brink. Apparently, producers were waffling about what to do with this segment for some time. Their indecision had something to do with legal issues, and the showrunners had to tread lightly. Originally shot as part of a Best of the Summer compilation show, it wasn't broadcast until that fall. When this unidentified man came on the United Kingdom version of Antiques Roadshow, he brought with him a piece of art that came his way years before. It didn't look too valuable, just a stencil portrait of a rat with a power tool. But something about the work wasn't right. During the broadcast, the man casually admitted that he had stolen the art. He didn't use the word itself, just said that he'd taken it without permission. But that detail was enough to turn things sour. Still, the seller tried to explain himself. I used to live in Brighton, England, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I was walking along the Brighton seafront when I saw it on the Lido, he explained to art expert Rupert Moss. It looked loose, I went over, pulled it off basically. How convenient. It was visibly awkward for the man to move forward after the confession, but Moss asked if the contestant knew the story behind the creator. Was some unknown street artist responsible? Well, the man replied that he already knew what it was. He hinted that it resembled the work of a world-famous designer. With that truth divulged, it seemed that this seller knew exactly what he was doing on that fateful day. I know what it is, I know what year it was around 2004, said the contestant. I'm basically just trying to get a valuation of it. Even so, the experts wouldn't jump right to the price tag conversation. Moss asserted that the proof had to be in the pudding. I'm not lecturing you, I'm just saying, but without that certificate, it's just very difficult to sell. Clearly, he had doubts about the artist whom this treasure seeker had just name-dropped. That's because the owner claimed it was the product of the most famous street artist in history, Banksy. The anonymous creator has left his evocative work all over the world. His pieces go for millions, so it seemed suspicious that this guy just pried an original right off a building. Assuming it was a genuine illustration, Banksy had already been running exhibitions and selling pieces for a fortune at that point. The seller said it dated back to 2004, a crazy year for Banksy's career. Though he never revealed his true identity, the artist did have ways to weed out frauds trying to latch on to his fame. That was why the Antiques Roadshow judges couldn't yet provide an appraisal. While a Banksy piece could be worth millions, the street artist's team would first have to confirm its authenticity. He calls it pest control, Moss said. Of course, that entire process is easier said than done. Not even experts on the show could confirm whether or not the painting was real. But the contestant learned that Banksy himself issues certificates of authenticity online. Either way, the seller was in a tight spot. If it was a real Banksy, then there was a good chance the work would have to re-enter the public domain, that is, he would have to put it back. If it was some no-name, well, then he was free to keep or sell his not-so-expensive illustration. But that reality didn't daunt him. When questioned about the matter of authenticity, the man responded that he didn't need it. I know it's real because Brighton was hit quite a bit by Banksy when he was down there around that time, he said. It was a contentious moment, though not one that Antiques Roadshow was totally unprepared for. At a later moment in the episode, host Fiona Bruce revealed that this wasn't the first time Banksy's art had appeared on the show. A genuine piece crossed their paths back in 2014, and it was among the most memorable segments in the show's history. That time around, the piece ended up selling for £400,000, or around $533,660. But of course, that only happened through Banksy's official verification. It certainly helped that lucky fellow that he didn't pry the item off the wall. In fact, it came with more than just a verification. Banksy himself chimed in. Upon verifying the 2014 work's authenticity, he left a note saying he was chuffed to help out. Even if Banksy took pity on this ambitious art dealer, there was a good chance the artist's fans would go rabid. Well, following the segment's debut, the internet went crazy. It seemed like this grifter was trying to make a quick buck off of art that was supposed to belong to everybody. Was it possible that he had committed a crime? Maybe multiple crimes? At least one fan claimed to have contacted the Sussex police force, who responded that they weren't aware of any public art thefts at all, especially not a Banksy. That seemed good enough to save the seller from having to hire a lawyer, but he still wanted an answer as to his ultimate question: what was the thing worth? Moss pointed out that the cost was entirely dependent on an official pest control certificate. With it, it might be worth £20,000. Without it, you're nowhere. I'm sorry. Banksy has yet to publicly comment on its legitimacy, leaving the Antiques Roadshow guest in limbo. But that doesn't mean he'll be silent. The artist is known for announcing his opinions in unconventional ways. He's even attacked the art establishment, so the Antiques Roadshow crew was reluctant to push Banksy. On October 5, 2018, Sotheby's in London was busy preparing for an auction. This itself was nothing remarkable. After all, that was their business. But the auction that day was special. Sotheby's are the experts when it comes to selling priceless works of art. They have been doing it for hundreds of years, but this day was going to be particularly special in the beginning of a new chapter. They were auctioning off a rare piece by Banksy. It was unlike any other sale. This is one artist who probably never expected to find his work being sold off to a wealthy bidder at a private auction house. Since the 1990s, he has made a name for himself with works that subvert artistic conventions and skewer various aspects of society. Chances are you've seen his work already even if you don't know it. Almost nobody knows who Banksy is. His real identity is a carefully guarded secret that likely will never come to light. You would think that would be something that would hamper his rising celebrity, but that's not the case. And even though his anonymity prevents him from doing interviews or having a social media presence, it certainly adds to his allure. Countless articles have been written about him, and even a documentary was about his work. Many theorists name Bristol artist Robin Cunningham as the likeliest candidate for Banksy, but all the dots still don't connect. It's quite possible, in fact, that Banksy may be multiple people collaborating under a single name. Banksy is most famous for his graffiti, a copy of which was going on sale at Sotheby's. His clever pieces go far beyond tagging his name on a brick wall. Instead, they have a biting visual message. His minimalist works often blend in seamlessly with the urban landscape. In fact, that's what makes them so darn compelling. They stop you in your tracks and make you look twice. Banksy has the unique ability to transform any ordinary object into politically charged art. Sometimes he accomplishes this feat with just a few words. So it's no surprise that so many collectors were chomping at the bit to buy their very own Banksy. They hungrily eyed the prize as the bids climbed up to $1 million and beyond. These high rollers were competing to get their hands on one of Banksy's most famous murals, Balloon Girl. Many critics consider it to be among the greatest works of art in the United Kingdom. But this version of Balloon Girl had one feature that the original lacked. Inside the frame, Banksy secretly lined the bottom of the painting with motorized blades. What was he planning? Well, the exact instant the painting sold, with a final price tag of $1.4 million, the booby-trapped frame shredded the painting to pieces. Nobody in attendance could wrap their minds around what had just occurred. What kind of artist would destroy his own work? Just because the painting is in tatters, however, doesn't mean it's worthless. Like so many other famous works of art, a little bit of damage might not be as damaging to the value as you might think. Art seller Steve Lazarides, one of the few individuals in Banksy's inner circle, suggested that the shredded version of Balloon Girl may even be worth more than the original. Though some members of the art community criticized the move as a cruel prank, others are now calling it one of Banksy's greatest demonstrations ever. Perhaps only one other stunt could rival its originality and shock value. Banksy made headlines around the world in 2015 by curating the Disneyland installation. The site utilized dozens of pieces to construct a sinister twist on the Disney franchise, and theme parks in general. Disneyland welcomed over 150,000 in its temporary run. Guests could enjoy, or at least tolerate, attractions such as a rundown princess castle, a museum of dangerous objects, and purposely unfair games like Topple the Anvil with a ping-pong ball. It's clear that when it comes to art, Banksy isn't content to let the status quo stand. From bizarre theme parks staffed by strange characters like the ones below to destroying his own art, he's always looking to up the ante.